So we see before us our most favorite expert, an author whose publications are tracked intensely by both myself and Yura. We are always keen to know what Andrey will say. It's not the Andrey Kolesnikov who works for Kommersant, a daily Russian national newspaper. He is an observer for other sources. There are Novaya Gazeta, Ведомости, Gazeta.ru, and some other publications, but I only read those. And then he writes fantastic reviews and books, where, for example, through hockey, through High School of Economics, he tells us how human passions work and institutions because of those passions. And there, an excellent writer is sitting in all beauty. She's sunburned, Masha Traub, who publishes 3 books a year. And for Yura Sinakosov, who reads excerpts from her books, she's one of the most preferred modern writers. I told you about love. In point of fact, I also sincerely urge you to keep an eye on how Andrey is reflecting upon this reality. Andrey Kolesnikov, because on top of what I've already told about his style, there's always a very profound literary, sociological, cultural logical background that he has. And this knowledge and capacity to master this knowledge helped his texts become, how shall I put it, observer-like, sort of, not only give us some information, but also give us a review. And since they are the journalists who are recording history, this is, we see before us, the first chronicler of what is going on with us right now. Thank you, Andrey. Well, I want to thank you. Then I will, like in the past, the researchers started their dissertations with a quotation from classicists, meaning Marxism, Leninism. Here, I will start with my presentation with a quotation by quoting Elena Nemirovskaya, who last year said she was ready to discuss the heat, but in the same passionate manner she discusses Soviet rule. So we now will discuss Soviet rule. Andrey, not everybody is keen to discuss in the heat. Elena and I, we cannot tolerate the heat. That's why we prefer democracy of the Nordic type. Well, my presentation, I would want to begin it with sociological data, the most recent data, which say that there is a certain mix-up in the heads of our compatriots. On the face of it, these data are controversial. The most recent survey by Levada Center about who downed the plane, the Malaysian Airlines plane, somewhere 82%. 82% tend to think that they were the Ukrainians who downed the Boeing, that it could be the rebels who downed the plane in the southeast of Ukraine. Only 3% believe that. Well, you see the difference, the gap is huge. People do not want to believe in something bad, that it could be done by Russian people or people who are proponents, champions of Russia. At that, as the most recent survey, also done in July, 60% of the again public surveyed is for normalizing relations with the West. At that, very high figures, you must probably kept an eye on this. In spring and in June, very high figures for those who were all in for military intervention of Russia into the conflict in the Ukraine. Nowadays, out of 45 to 61%, This is the number of adversaries who are against military intervention. But the figures are still very high. Those who now, it used to be 30%, now it's slightly less, but still there are plenty, abnormally high figures. Well, like one of, how could in one post-Soviet Russian could fit into the same sort of mentality, this inclination to bring the troops someplace like it was done in the past, the predecessors of today's government in August 1968 in Czechoslovakia, or in Hungary and Poland. And why on the other side? Why does the degree of hysteria, nationalistic hysteria, go declining slightly? Why do people still think that you need to cooperate with the West? This is the main enigma of the Russian soul. How could it fit into the same mind? I'm speaking about the soul, not about the mind. Because if somebody thought rationally to combine it all into one, in one mind, it's impossible, as well as the sacred belief that this plane could not be downed by rebels or by somebody with the assistance of Russia. In point of fact, what happened with the Russian nationalism, which became something that brought people together, this is where the horror of this new Russian nationalism, as I put it, its justification of war. War at a certain time, now to a slightly less degree, the degree is falling, of tension is falling. The war became something fashionable, something to show off, something attractive, a victorious war. All these epithets, yes, and easy. It has to be an easy, light. We easily took over Crimea without shooting one single shot. That's why the war seems to have something very attractive to us. I mean, not us present here. I mean, we have more than ethnic Russians here, but I mean, these mass figures that are returned by sociological surveys. And justification of a war, readiness to play the war, to shoot a bit, to feel the shoulder of your comrade in arms. And this is the most horrible thing that has happened during the post-Soviet time with our people. There is a certain devilish symbolism about it happening in 2014, 100-year anniversary of First World War. At the same time, they also experienced the so-called, in quotation marks, patriotic rise and unfounded altogether. This situation brought about the new type. This type has existed before, but nowadays they've never played such an important role in politics, in social life, and so on. This is the type we could decided people wearing sports suits, people who are watching television, talk with this television set, and have appointed themselves as generals of these combat activities as they're watching television and pressing buttons on their remote control as if it were a trigger. I don't really watch television, but I understand the might of today's propaganda and the way it impacts the mentality, and sociology stands to prove that it really is the case. And this type of personality, somebody who's wearing their sports suit, this is somebody who are dominating. As a rule, this person remains what we call a virtual fighter, a virtual combatant. The best weapon he has ever held in his arms was a computer mouse. Because well, we know that it's not something innocent, innocuous. We cannot say there is a party of computer against the party that is watching television. They are all in for the motherland, almost for Stalin. But this is a virtual war, and there is a real war. Sometimes these people in small numbers, statistically it's very hard to measure, but sometimes they go out for a real war. Very much like volunteers went to fight to Serbia. Very much nowadays, some people do go to war in the southeast of Ukraine because they feel that nowadays it's both fashionable and available and even approved, morally approved by others, which is also very bad. Those who are watching television, they understand that this war bell is tolling for them too, and it can also hit them like a boomerang. You remember the novel of Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls. They've never read it, they've only known the fifth column, that this is the play by Hemingway that gave rise to this phrase, the fifth column. This is also, these people, they in part make up the social basis for today's social regime of today's leader the country has. And it turns out that Putin, having supported the rebels in the southeast, he becomes like hostage. In today's situation, he cannot make a U-turn and stop supporting them because their offended weapons can turn against him in theory. Although again, I do not tend to think that this will happen in the literal sense of the word. This person of a new type evolved in real combat that is going on in southeast Ukraine. There are, in political science, special terms that describe what is going on there. It's called hybrid war, when the policy of great powers and even the world order are determined by some people who turn out there by chance, people who don't have even not known by their names, so know their nicknames like Bye-Bye. Well, the world order now appointed him like former Chief Makhno, who are all of a sudden armed with machine guns, God knows where the automatic rifles, nobody knows where they came from. The horror of hybrid war is that there are no sides that fight each other. There is no such officially Russia cannot control, Russia cannot control those who are fighting like partisans in this hybrid war. Russia certainly would want to control them. They're sort of champions in the southeast of Ukraine, but it doesn't work this way. For this reason, Crimea belongs to us, and southeast of Ukraine is not needed to anybody in today's establishment, because we won't be able to govern it. Neither economy nor social sphere, let alone that we shall be, then they will have to exterminate those partisans who had ostensibly fought on our side to somehow put some order in place. This is where the difficulty of this hybrid war and these hybrid people who evolved in this war. I mentioned the social basis that supports President Putin, that certainly has grown because of a certain patriotic consolidation or quasi-patriotic consolidation of the nation, but the social basis, as probably is thought from the top, it's governable, it's manageable. You can control it. In point of fact, this social basis also can go for a protest, but it not be the protest in Bolotny, it will be protests like we saw, like pogroms in Birylova. People who protest like in Birylova, spiritually and ideologically, they're close to today's government. A government would like to have them as a basis and lean against them, but in principle, today's government think that they can rule them, which may turn out to be a mistake. Maybe yes, maybe no, but it seems to me that Birylova protest is much more dangerous than Bolotny square protest for today's government. Actually, this is what makes the situation explosive, although not anybody among sociologists, political scientists, or social science specialists can measure exactly the amount of this fascist-prone mass that can even turn against Putin. Yesterday I was on air in Radio Svoboda, and former intelligence officer Viktor Suvorov, who defected and who stayed in the West and is still hiding himself from revenge, and he says that this mass of people who take part in this southeast in hybrid war, they can become the detonators of all Russian times of trouble. Where do all these people go after the war ends? What will they do? they become a match that will try to light our Russia up from all sides. I do not believe, I suppose they will dilute themselves somewhere in the space, illegal fields, so nobody will legalize them for good reason. And my suggestion by colleague Suvorova, that seemed pretty interesting to me. Another important plot that I wish to discuss with you in today's context is why is it that so many people, and it is an important question, consolidated against the patriotic idea, against the carrier of this idea, our leader, against the idea of Crimea and so on and so forth. Why are they so plentiful? I have a hypothesis. Again, I don't claim that this is a true hypothesis. What it's all about is that there's protest in Bolotnaya, which was pretty much mass because of a very knowledgeable opposition. First they took a pause and then they tightened the screws and closed it down. This protest disappointed strongly those who might sympathize with it. You know, sociological figures at the lowest, this is the lowest figure in the recent years. This is where other figures of those who support and ready to protest for the economic and social rights. There was a special survey, and those who are ready to protest because of the infringement on political rights. The lowest figures in many years, as don't believe in efficacy, and the people get tired of protests. This leads to what is known as Stockholm syndrome. People begin to justify the government, and they were given the reason to justify something, an idea that would consolidate them. A totally different story why it is the Crimea that became the consolidating idea. I have my own version that might explain it. Probably it's from the sphere of political historical psychology. I think that for Russians, the Crimea is a special ideology, a special plot, a special story, in agreement with that Krim is ours, is deeply instilled in Russians, although few are the people who think that Putin has not violated international law. People mostly think that he did, but in principle they think that this violation is quite okay. It's morally, politically admissible, because we must restore historical justice. And this Stockholm syndrome that goes hand in hand with these very specific ideas that Russians entertain about the Crimean idea that are deeply embedded in history. It is the Taurida project by Catherine the Great. So this idea that the Crimea is our internal Russian domestic paradise, it works. Ideas that it turns out survive longer than we think. They go back to many, many years back in history. There's another reason why this consolidation took place. It has a more understandable economic reason. Russia is now a country among those countries with mid-income. It's clear that it's oil rent, it's clear that the market situation and oil prices are good. The market economy works to this to some extent. There is a syndrome in economic psychology that, well, it's more. We would be okay with what things are today. We don't want them to get worse.
Let it be like it is now, and it's all related to the current leadership and the name of the leader, ultimate leader. And in a sense, in metaphoric terms, all the people can be referred to as the party of rentals. It's much broader than the United Russia and the party of power. One may argue that it's oligarchs who receive rentals and oligarchs and close inner circle of Putin, but there is such a notion as infiltration of the rent. Despite its unjust distribution, still some of the rent is spent for social needs, and partially it gets into the budget as revenues and then distributed among low-income people. And anyway, to serve one oligarch, multiple servants, doctors, teachers, tennis coaches and instructors are required. So those rentals go down. And from one oligarchs, those rentals are distributed throughout the other strata of the population, and that's what we refer to as rent infiltration. No one is going to give up that rent, and perhaps it's quite a customary observation, but until oil and gas prices drop, the party of power will still be a rock, a solid rock. But patriotism that may seed some doubts among those people reasonable enough. And besides economic factors, and in a country with mid-economic level, the share of middle class is quite considerable. We have some estimates, but they are quite tentative. So even if there is 20 or 25 or 30% of the middle class in the country, numbers are quite high, and those people cannot live for a long time feeling themselves in a sieged fortress. There is no piece of ideology which justifies in the eyes of the middle class the fact that right now, when we lost all those preferences from international trade and lending, we will have to get down to business. We will straighten up the economy. We will start working hard, raise labor productivity. But that's rubbish from my perspective. I cannot discuss it even seriously, but that's the new ideological pattern that is really entertained by some high-ranking people. And it's also covered in the press. I read an article by a very serious reporter, Mr. Karshan, about that, but I disagree with that. So if you take away from the middle class something, and if you take away the opportunity to pay their bills with Visa or MasterCards, it's terrible. It will be a disaster. And if you shut down the SWIFT money transfers, let's see how patriotic those people are or will be. So that's the reason the government is doing its utmost to maintain current payment system and maintain the opportunity to operate current credit cards and other means. And that's why that kind of patriotism is a little bit rotten, and that may lead to the fact that the degree of that patriotism will go down. There are some other people who also support leaderships and bosses. That's what we call elite or elites. We believe that prior to the Crimea they were in a split, and they merged after the Crimea. Since things changed, and if you tried to split something else after the Crimea, you would be very severely punished and defeated. But there is one irreversible thing that has happened, and that is the international reputation of Mr. Putin, who is absolutely ruined. So that person has ceased to exist for Euro-Atlantic community, and which is not the case with Asia and Latin America. He was well received in Brazil, in Argentina, which, by the way, has gone bankrupt and announced a default today or yesterday. So that reputation is ruined, and that may be quite a serious impact on the moods of the elite that is well integrated into the Western world in every aspect. And the elite is pro-Western in their habits, in their mentality. And but they are forced to be patriotic at the time, not to lose their positions in the country. And that elite can be very much displeased with Mr. Putin and start splitting and looking for an alternative for him. And still, that patriotism that is being imposed on the people is very specific. It's kind of a look at the outer world through the lenses of the well, not marginal part of the population. It's quite big, but I would refer to them as ultra-nationalistic. And you cannot look for a long time at this world through those lenses for a long time. Newsweek magazines published an article about Mr. Putin's date based on the interviews with insiders, and it reads that Putin starts his day with 3 files from FSB, FSO, which is the federal security system, and the other security agency. And that brings me to the end of my introduction and presentation. Dear colleagues, it's time for comments, remarks. We started a little bit later, so we will finish also later. So please, your question. High School of Economics. I'm Yamalchikov Nikolai from the Tumen region. At the end of your speech, you said that the modes of the elites could change and split appear. But let's think of 5 or 10 years ago. Was it a monolith? Personally, I don't think so. And research shows that it's not a monolith, it's not solid, and we can see split in business elite and political elite and others. Could you comment on that? You are quite right. And, the split of elites took place before. Perhaps it was not visible from outside, since those people realized that any manifestations of the split could result in imprisonment for them, like it had happened with Mr. Khodorkovsky. There was a split, and there is a split, but now it's even more latent, since to oppose the power openly is the same as to sign your death penalty or your imprisonment sentence. And we can see that. Well, when was it when did the Federation Council approve of the right of the authority for Mr. Putin to bring troops to eastern Ukraine? Nobody voted against. Nobody opposed to that move from political or financial elites. They realized that the door had been shut down, and if you say something in opposition, you would be behind that door, and they are not prepared for that. And then came the Crimea, and it raised the patriotic wave very high. And you cannot oppose a wave, a tsunami, and only a crazy person can dare doing that. It's much better to drift along with the wave. So we saw no resignation of a single minister, even those who practice liberal practices and liberal by convictions, even Democrats, not a single word against. The only thing that what they are doing, and they try to mitigate the major risks of those sanctions, and I would like to thank them for that, because it's, you know, to stay with the elite now, even in customary terms, and if you are there, it's hard to give up your status. And split, if it exists, it is going on in very latent forms. We saw some rumors that some of the elite supported Navalny, but following September elections of the last year, and Navalny was finally pressured and was forced out of politics, those rumors stopped, and conspiracies stopped, and attempts to find an alternative person to Putin were also stopped. And that's the right thing to do right now. But I agree with you that there is a split. Alexander, please. Something of the statehood like. You know, I'm always in favor. Two brief questions. Chernov Alexander from Bryansk. Do you like to go to the Crimea? We made a note of that. Your second question. It's about Mr. Putin. Do you think he wants to restore his image on the international arena, and if he does, in what way he can do that? Speaking of the Crimea, I'm fond of the Crimea. I've been always fond of Crimea, but I haven't been there for a long time. Because infrastructure, good infrastructure, resort infrastructure is not there, and for the same money, with the same climate, you can get better services in other countries. And I know a lot of my colleagues who think the same, and now we think that we cannot go to the Crimea because it was annexed by the Russian power. I don't think I'm closing my way to the Crimea. I can go there, but that annexation from the standpoint of the international law, no matter what Minister Lavrov says, is a fact. When it was Ukrainian, I could go there. Perhaps I can go there and now and revisit my favorite places there. As for the restoration of image of Mr. Putin in the West, I don't think it is possible. I'm not Putin or his press secretary Peskov, so I cannot say if he realizes that or not. But I think that Putin and Inner Circle, they lean to Asian countries, seeking at least moral support. And it's also true about their attitudes towards the BRICS countries. Some international recognition is really needed because even if the economy is based on state-run efforts and oligarchs, but it was supported not only by domestic lending but international lending as well. We had international financiers in the country, and they are still here so far. I think that both the elite and Mr. Putin realize that it's bad. But I don't think that it will be possible to restore his image in the Euro-Atlantic community. Just look at the cover stories of the media following the crash of the Malaysian Boeing. Edward, your question, please. Thank you. I'm Eduard Amerov from Bashkortostan Republic. So my question, Andrey, is as follows. One of the Ukrainian public figures, perhaps even a politician, who is Eduard Khodas, in one of his speeches described bankruptcy of national elites. And I think he said that it was happening because there is a global plan when everybody would be subordinated to the global center. So if there is a plan, reasons can be various and multiple, bad president, gas prices. So what do you think of that? If you mean that secret world government, I don't think they have a plan to destroy Russian elite. Perhaps they want to remove Mr. Putin. But it's also the desire of the national elite. They also want the system to change. And perhaps the national elite is even prepared to establish true democracy, not the simulation of democracy. But the Russian national elite killed itself because it's fully supported that patriotic uprise and said a single word in opposition. If it doesn't dare saying those things in public, then it means that there is no elite, and they have lost all their authority. So they are really bankrupt, and I agree with you. And under pressure from bottom, from the side, or from the top, I don't know when, but as we move to 2017 and 2018, if something changes really, that elite will immediately change up their image and say it has always been democratic. And so that just to retain their states and positions, and we're going to see and hear that. And the elite perhaps will try to find some role for them and appoint an interim or transitional prime minister. Suarez played that role after Franco. But the elite is bankrupt, and it's hard to say exactly what it will be like in several years. I'm Ivan Vlasov from Kaliningrad. You said that for the authorities, the protest in Birilova is much more dangerous than the rally in Bolotnaya Square. But should another Bolotnaya unrest happens, then Putin can be replaced by some even more vicious force. And the result about results you can read in Mr. Sorokin's books. Do you think that a scenario is possible? It's an old Russian, pattern, ideological pattern. It's been known since 1960s when Mr. Gershenson wrote that the power with bayonets were defending intelligentsia from the people's hatred. But that's a hard question again, because in sociological terms it cannot be measured. In the liberal camp, there was an idea, supported by many, that Putin existed so that the middle class and liberal community could be protected and defended by him from the crazy marginal people. And in 1996, when Yeltsin won his second term, great efforts were made in order to bring him to, or rather to maintain him in power. But if he had established some kind of a totalitarian regime, I don't know what could happen. And the appointment of the Primakov government in 1998, and because they were communists, in fact, but Yeltsin was afraid that the country would be destroyed, and he appointed them. But the Primakov's government turned out to be most democratic and liberal. It was the most liberal period in the economy of the country. So again, it means that it's hard to say, hard to make a judgment. And I think that the craziness of the people, of some people, is overestimated and overemphasized. Russian people do not differ much from other peoples, and there are fundamentals, there are extreme right or left. And just look at the level of anti-Semitism in France now because of the Palestinian crisis. And Greece, there is the party, the fascist party, the Golden Dawn, and they also have representations in the parliament. And Russia doesn't differ much from those countries. There could be some historical reasons for nationalism to rise. Could be common reasons, migrations, and that strengthening nationalist feelings. And I think that should free elections happen, we'll see that nationalists are not many, ultra-nationalists are not many, and they are not that dangerous force as they are portrayed. Alexander Shmilov, please. I'm Alexander Shmilov from Moscow. I feel awkward, but I talked to another expert, Boris Grazovsky, and thought it was worth telling about some aspects and think that when you started propaganda, you are succumbed to things that are being imposed on us. Just 3 points. You said that Russian power is not in control in autonomous republics, but I don't think that it's really the case. There are presidential agents who really in close control. Well, the parallel between Berilova protests and Bolotnaya rally, I think it's also been imposed, and even if you look at the Berilova protest and protests in the town of Pugachev, and if you compare them with riots in Paris and London you mentioned, you can see that in our case those protests were quite peaceful. In London and Paris we saw a lot of burned cars, looted stores, and so on and so forth. I don't think that the power is afraid of some individual protests. It is afraid of the fact that sometimes those protests can merge, can be combined, and the Ukrainian events only strengthened their conviction. My third point concerns the public polls, opinion polls. Just imagine that we do not know how many Russian people support the acquisition of the Crimea. I think that the rhetoric of the people would be quite different. The opponents to the acquisition would feel free to speak about that because they wouldn't think themselves a minority. Those who are supporting the acquisition wouldn't be that proactive and aggressive, and undecided would just say that they do not know, they are undecided. And it's a sociological fact that if you are told that 85% of your compatriots support one or another position and you have no position at all, you will most likely join those 85%. And when most of the media are subordinated to one leader, I think the numbers of such polls are also manipulated and rigged. Thank you. I could both agree and disagree with every statement you made. As for the control over the eastern Ukraine, southeastern Ukraine, we all do not know the state of things there. Perhaps it's Mr. Putin who is aware, but again, he's informed by security services. And certainly there are attempts to have some control over the situation there. Otherwise, Mr. Baradai and Mr. Borodin would not be there. But they are mostly PR experts, public relation experts, and not managers. So I think that is why it's an illusion of control, not real control. And those people who are in the field, who are field fighters, they do not report to anybody. And that's precisely why I believe that the degree of that control by Russia over those people are overestimated. It's like in any guerrilla war. In the longest Vietnamese war, we saw various degrees of the American controls over their puppet regime in South Vietnam, although I'm sure that they had more instruments to have control over them. As for the conflicts in Berilova and rally in Bolotnaya, Well, I mostly agree with you. I don't think that protest in Berilovo was massive, and it was a local protest. It didn't spill over geographical boundaries of Moscow, just one neighborhood in Moscow, and it couldn't spill over to the territory of Russia. And in large cities, people have special mentality, and so people are not tempted to support such things, and they need stability and not riots. And when you say that Bolotny rally could be, when I said that Bolotny rally was quite safe for Mr. Putin, and I know that if in 2011, 2012, President Putin had been persuaded to have a roundtable talks with the opposition, he could have legitimized his power much better. Certainly, it posed a lot of threats and risks to him. But anyway, if he had to leave, he would be going out with clear conscience. And again, speaking of public polls, I agree that's an instrument to manipulate the people. And I watch television not often. I don't know if that coverage was on air, but I don't think that they mean much in terms of propaganda, because it's very few people who watch those opinion polls. And I referred to Levada Center figures and numbers, who are known in this country as foreign agents, and that's a governmental statistic agency, and I disregard their results. And so in this case, I don't think that it was really propaganda. And I really trust the performance of the Levada Center colleagues. Thank you very much. I'm Ekaterina Fedorova, school graduate of 2013. I have some introduction. Andrey Kolesnikov, your colleague, wrote in Facebook, Sydney, a private Catholic school, a lesson of Testament, and 12-year students are asked to describe what they mean by good deeds. And they wrote they could cut a lawn and do something else. And one Australian boy turned to a Russian colleague from the Russian forest. And Valery, for the next weekend, could stop short of shooting down a commercial aircraft. Everybody laughed. Very good perception of Russian people. But thanks, Lord, not many Russian boys go to foreign Catholic schools. We speak a lot, or say a lot, that Russia will have to pay the price for that disaster. And it would be felt with conventional people. How can you explain that? How can you describe that? I mean, and I would like to, again, emphasize the fact that in every term, Russians are the same as other nations. And if we're getting worse, and it means that we are forced to be worse, because war is portrayed as something that deserves respect, and otherwise we are the same. And as Voland, the character of the Bulgakov's book, put it, it's only the shortage of apartments that spoiled us. And I think that that poll, according to which only 3% believe that it's the separatists or militants who shot down the Malaysian aircraft, proves the fact that Russian people still believe that it's very bad to shoot commercial aircraft down by missiles. And if we believe that militants, rebels, if you have sympathy for to those rebels, you don't believe, you are not tempted to believe that it was them who had shot down the aircraft.
We might expect that the situation will normalize, although it is quite difficult to talk about any norm as the situation seems to be degrading. Jakub Nina from Poland. If the Ukrainian forces win a decisive victory over the separatists, what change in the reaction of the Russian government might follow? Would the Russian government try to find a scapegoat? What new rhetoric could surface? Well, this is a fairly difficult question, because the Kremlin propaganda has not even given much thought to this scenario, because there are too many operational questions needs attention at the moment, and I even think that the degree of propaganda zeal might even go down, because this burden of the southeast of the Ukraine, which makes Russia an almost fortress under siege, is certainly not convenient for the Russian government. And the situation when the Ukrainian government eventually quenches this revolt, then Moscow might in principle start negotiations with the Kiev government. I suppose this situation could only be dreamt of by the Russian political establishment, and I do not rule out that they might indeed hope for this solution, or this kind of solution. Pavel Donyuk, Alexander from Moscow. Has anybody thought about the realistic scenario of exiting the Crimean crisis? Are we to sit under sanctions forever? Well, I read somewhere that Morgan Stanley published a report, quite characteristic from the standpoint of your question. I have not read the report itself. It's just in the Vedomosti or Kommersant interpretation that Putin has two ways. One is to stop supporting the separatists and move along the lines of cooperation, or else to follow the lead of the more patriotic thing. But one should not think about devising these two ways out. They're quite obvious. They are on the surface. But one might suspect there would be some sort of a middle way to reorient the West. The attempts to receive the high degree of propaganda zeal, but unfortunately, I think that we would have to sit under the sanctions for long, and it would have been possible. But today, I think that the sanctions will continue to exacerbate. Thank you very much. Natalia Androsenko. The Crimean topic. They say, take Crimea, get back Crimea, the Anschluss. How about the basic will of the people? What is to be done with the viewpoints, political point, and the general view of the population of Crimea, which in its absolute majority want to be a part of Russia? What do you do with these people? Well, there's nothing to be done about these people. The Crimea will be Russian for the next several decades, and I think will even survive the sanctions. Nobody would ever even consider giving it back unless there is some radical change in the Russian government. But of course, there is some very important probabilistic approach here. So nothing to be done about the opinion of the people, really. Until Mr. Putin decided to pick up Crimea, nobody thought about, no, this is not true. This is not true. No, I agree with you that 90% of Crimea's population wanted to be a part of Russia, and that at the same time, I know that the annexation of a part of the territory of another state is called an annexation. But they're not serfs. Can't they make it for themselves? Are they serfs? No, they're not serfs, but the referendum there was not a referendum. If the Ukrainian authorities had decided to do that, if the government in Kiev had decided to ask the people if they want to join Russia, then that would have been a referendum. There are exclaves and enclaves. There is a Russian enclave in Kazakhstan. If they're asked, do you want to live in Kazakhstan or in Russia, they don't live much better than the people in Crimea. This is a poorer place, so they might think that they would be given more food, and that the Russians live in Russia. So, of course, with such a referendum, the population of Kazakhstan would come and say, "Come and get us." And in that same way, Russia is telling this, the southeastern Ukraine, we don't want to take you because you're a depressive region. We don't have enough money in the budget. The pension system of Russia, the budget of Russia, are going to dogs because of the joining of Crimea. So this is my counter logic. Yes, I know perfectly well that the giant, the 90% of all people in Crimea wanted to live in Russia. Bartosz Gombak from Poland. After all these events, how do you see the future of the Russian journalism? Thank you for this question. Frankly, I do not have much hopes for the future of the Russian journalism. I know that there is federal journalism and there is regional journalism. The regional journalism has its specific problems, which may not even be quite familiar to the people in Moscow. Very symptomatic. When the history of journalists from Khabarovsk came up with an initiative to decorate Mr. Putin with the hero of Russia star. So Mr. Putin is a soldier, is the last soldier of the empire, so we should award him with the medal. Frankly, technologically speaking, it is clear that what is to be taught at the departments of journalism And there are some technologies which can be widely taught. But journalism is a profession, and people forget about this, but I come from the old school. I think that the journalists must have conscience and talent. Two important things. People need to be able to write, but they should also need to be able to reflect. And what is happening on the TV, the hysteria in the publications which are fed by the Kremlin administration is a moral catastrophe. And in this sense, I think that the future of the faculties and departments of journalism at the Russian universities is not particularly bright. And what are we to talk about, really, in terms of the opposition journalism? So I'm very pessimistic from this standpoint. And I think that even teaching of journalism is not particularly coherent. Lena asked for a word. Well, I would like a public statement, but in this sense I would like to address Natalia. I would like to express a contrary opinion, but I would also like for this to be made in public. Why do I think how she thinks, and why do I think differently? That Crimea is ours, so we have known from the school days, we know it on our biography, we know it by the millions of circumstances of the Russian history. But historically, this territory became a part of a different state. I think that if the life is good here and there, it would not be particularly different if it is Russian or Ukrainian. And you don't need to go to Turkey or to Greece. And indeed, Crimea is a amazing place, replete with the Russian poetry and history. But why do I think differently still? If we have sat by the tables of the G7 and G20, we understand that we need independent judiciary, we need to be able to express our opinion, we need to be able to understand that the majority of people must have a majority and then have a minority. But the problem is that apparently there was an agreement under the breakup of the Soviet Union that certain boundaries, and we're not talking about how they were formed, because Ukraine gained territories and Russia lost territory, as well as Kazakhstan gained territory. On today's balance, is it balanced? Is it possible to conduct a referendum on the territory of a foreign state and conduct a referendum? And I think that this is a fundamental question. This is a question about our instincts as to how we can bring our instincts and desires with the conventions of the life in the civilized international community. And even if there are other cases in other countries, doesn't mean that this was acceptable. We're talking about this symbolic figure of the international law. My second idea is that during World War I, and the national states were highly relevant, the boundaries were set by force. When the Second World War followed, whole peoples were resettled to have to preserve the borders. Would it not be proper for our time to work towards the transparency of borders, whereby people, goods, ideas may move and transcend the boundaries without breaking the lives and integrity of peoples? Would it not be proper for us to foster the transparency of borders, the transcendence of borders? This is not to say that states won't have their interests or traditions, but something is done over the border, and this something which is over the border may be the non-violation of the status quo. No, I understand what you said, but Tamara Marshakova told us about the courts. She talked about the judiciary. And even with, while we were quite concerned, and we are quite concerned, we still talk about the independent judiciary because we realize that we have to have a reference point for justice, the point where we're all equal before the law. And this introduction of the legal concepts and rules into our lives is something very complicated and difficult, but this might be the only way for us to avoid the wars. I remember the quotation. You will be laughing from a letter of Dunayevsky about Crimea. And I have a file on my computer, 1952. Dunayevsky writes, concerning the Crimea, I've been in Crimea many times. I lived there for a year when I served for the theater. I think that Crimea lost its exotic nature without the Tatars. These are the places which are abandoned and obsolete. So historically, I think everything is a lot more difficult than we can even conceive. Natalia, I understand that you would like to discuss this and to debate this, but Lena is open for discussion. You are very welcome to come and express other arguments during the break. Sergei. Sergei Burtsev from Krasnodar. We, as intelligent and well-mannered people who have come, and we know our people, this image of the men in the tracksuits sitting before the TV, we are not particularly interested in talking to this man. But it is not difficult to me to come and talk with such people. We can know where, how he consumes information, what are his consuming habits. We have to realize that most people, most Russians are on the TV, are present on the social networks. However, we are usually not interested to talking to our own people. Why don't we going to go and talk to the people? Why didn't Mr. Navalny wish to go to Odnoklassniki social networks and only went to the Facebook? So, would it not be proper to try and understand what does the Russian want? What does what does a common folk want? Well, a very interesting statement, and I thank you for it, because this is a very a very important topic. I worked for the Union of Right Forces party, and we were writing the party programs, party manifestos. We tried to think and consider these very questions that my colleague has mentioned, that we need the liberal patriotism or even liberal imperialism. We have to take our ideas down to the people. We worked for 3 years. We expressed these ideas in an understandable way. Then we lost the elections. We tried to get closer and closer to the people. And we thought that we would stop being a liberal party if we get closer and closer to the people. We would become a national socialist country. I am myself a part of these people, and even though I may belong to the minority, but I am a part of that very people, which is part of the preamble. The government doesn't want to talk to me. The government talks to the people in the tracksuits. The government is not in any way interested talking to the minorities. I have no way to have a representative in this government, except for some wretched ministers which don't seem to play any role. And I think that I must be talked to, and I think that I am cornered and not the man in the tracksuit. Even though I think that the person in the tracksuit is just as much of a representative of the Russian people as I am, with the same rights and responsibilities, and that he can be respected or not respected for different reasons. But we have to realize that the ideology of the government over the past years has been indeed about the dissent and the schism within this very people. What was the beginning of the protests quenching in 2012? This was the great opposition between the Poklonnaya Hill and the Bolotnaya Square. They said that the people on the Bolotnaya Square are putting on the heavy furs, and the people on Poklonnaya are the true people. And then they had Mikhail Leontiev, Kurginyan, and Shevchenko to talk before these people. It is not my function to talk to the people. I'm not a politician. I do not want to be a politician. I do not have any social accounts in Facebook or Odnoklassniki or any other social network online. It is not my responsibility or indeed my purpose to talk to the people in the tracksuit. But what I would like to do is that the politicians, having won the respect and the liking of these people with the tracksuit, I would like these politicians to come and talk to me, to come and talk to the minority. Then it might be somewhat useful to the country. For right now, the government is only talking to the people in the tracksuit. The Ukraine is awake. Alexandra Azarkina from Simferopol. Talking of the manipulations and the percentage, in a manipulative way, none of my friends went to the referendum, but maybe my question might remind you of my friend's question about the sanctions, but how must the Ukrainian government build its informational campaign to withstand the Russian propaganda without betraying the liberal values? I don't know. You have to write the truth. The function of the mass media is to tell the truth. I think that I remember the time in the beginning, in middle, around 2005, when many people went to work in the Ukraine, Savik Schuster and others, it would not be proper to give any recipes. But journalism is about keeping the standards and some conscience. And in this sense, the Russian journalism, the Ukrainian journalism must not be in any way different from Russian, Polish, or any other journalism. This is what I might have responded. Alexei, second Ukraine. Alexei Girenko, Kiev, Ukraine. Mother of the Russian cities. You have given a couple of ways for subverting the regime of. No. Please listen to me. I think you may well get. Oh, I'm just warning you. No, frankly, I do not know whom did you mean, but please adhere the parliamentary rhetoric. I think that a political change would not solve the major problem in Russia, because I'm talking about the contagion, the infection of the Russian soul, which led to the war in Georgia and in the war in the Ukraine, which is partially imperial. And if the regime disappears, but this would not disappear. This willingness to expand the territory and not to live better does not go away. So do you think that this is a serious problem? Do you believe that this is a virus? Do you think that penance is possible if the regime goes away, like in Germany several decades ago? And how important is this problem? Well, the problem does exist. The problem is historically quite justified by the fact that we still live in the empire which is dissolving. And we saw this process starting in the end of the 80s, which is it is about the southeast of Ukraine, and Crimea is the continuation of the ruin. We look back and we can see the ruins. And the problem of the Russian nationalism would also continue to be there with both imperialism and nationalism. But the Russian people, for all intents and purposes, is not different from any other people in terms of nationalism, internationalism, ration ratio, and reason and folly. The Russian people is no different. I think that we're just working for the national mentality to change. But when you speak about the change of government and if the regime becomes democratic, then of course the degree of strain would go down very significantly, even though the post-imperial complex would not go away. Alexei Yermakov. When they say that the majority of Russian citizens are today online and in the social networks, I would like to ask a question. What do you do with the forecast for the development of the Russian society? Well, if you talk about that part of the middle class, which is also reflexive, which is partially expressed in the social networks, then I think that the economic situation of this group of people is quite difficult, but we still think that there are some possibilities for restoring, for having a normal life. Indeed, some people tend to think about leaving Russia, but this is more of a personal choice. And this is about patriotism. One can be a patriot living in Berlin and Paris. One can stay in Russia and live in the terms of struggle, or you can live in terms of dissent without open struggle. There are many options, many ways, many different formats. I, for myself, I'm prepared to continue live in Russia as long as I can. Stanislav. Stanislav Avramenko, Rostov-on-Don. In Rostov, there have been cases of bombs from the Ukrainian side. Do you believe that wide-scale military conflict with participation of Russia in Europe possible? Do you believe in turn that this would lead to the curtailing or indeed liquidation of any opposition work? And how can one be oppositionary if such a scenario is implemented? Yeah, the bombs falling in the Rostov region. I'm very far from giving an approval or else a positive evaluation for the regime that has been formed in Kiev, and war is war. nothing's good about war on both parties. And if this conflict becomes a direct conflict in the European continent, such as a conflict between Ukraine and Russia, this will be a catastrophe, and this will be a catastrophe for this opposition class, or the reflection-minded class, because any representative, any Russian, is at the same time a mobilization unit. So an oppositionary becomes an enemy, and we would have to send our kids to war. I mean, we live within an anti-utopia. It would have been totally unbelievable to think that the Russians and the Ukrainians would fight in the southeast of Ukraine. I think that opposition would be impossible under such circumstances. And emigration would be the only option. But we don't want to even to talk about, one doesn't even want to think about this. Boris Grozovsky. My question is about the national elite, which has approved of the policies of the Russian government, which they have led to what we may call the bankruptcy of the political establishment. And so, if we speak about there were people who disagreed, and there were those who agreed.
And if you count the number of our common acquaintances in the establishment, then they have always supported it all. And it was well they supported the arrest of Khodorkovsky and governed the elections that were suspended. And in this way they turned bankrupt somewhat sooner, several years sooner. I suppose there is this whole story about terminology, not about the substance. When I said elite, I meant non-opposition elite that is now in government, and those who have supported all that the government did, and at that I would call them counter-elite. When I say elite, I say those people from the elite who support what the government do, but counter-elite, I mean those people from the elite in the broad sense of the word who do not support what the government do. So I would like to draw the line here in terms of terminology. Marina? Marina Ilyushenko from Khabarovsk region. I would like to make a comment about the initiative by 3 journalists. I read their news in Facebook. Their colleagues called them, to put it mildly, strange, queer. There were some very outrageous comments, and this is something that made me happy. So my question is, Andrey, tell me please, alongside with Ukraine and Crimea, what else do you think we need to write about to Russian journalists, both in Moscow and in the regions? Journalism is a science about man, as usually the case is. Let's go through, show the events through human perspective. I suppose this is the way of this is a journalism, one of many journalisms that exists, but it's actually a matter of genres. There is a news component, there is sketches, there are any others. So here we're probably speaking about different genre. It all is in the name of man, and from the perspective of men. Okay, but what other topics could be covered other than these two? Well, I suppose you can cover it all. It's clear that, but I'm a really great champion of genres share stories. The question is that it doesn't always sell. Journalism or media, it's also in part business, and if we speak about news agenda, then it's clear that today Ukraine, the crisis, global crisis, is really on top of it all. There is a huge topic that is known as culture. This is, put it mildly, you can write extensively and with great pleasure and quite as often as you can. There's no news at all. Anna, another question on Ukraine. Hello, Anna Matyukhina from Ukraine. May I suggest that you should comment the situation? The Supreme Rada in Ukraine, many changes are underway. The first is they banned the Party of the Regions, and in point of the persecution on all the members that they mounted, and all the members. And secondly, banning the Communist Party of Ukraine, and abolishment and banning. How do you comment on this? This continues the subject that I do not idealize the political regime that is evolving in Ukraine. I suppose it's there. I suppose it's being now what we call zero cycle, and it's clear that during the situation of conflict, of inner and outward tension, they take steps that are very abrupt. To put things, calling them spade a spade, we would say authoritarian. I disapprove of it. I understand the political logic that leads to such steps, but at the same time I realize that, yes, this is quite authoritarian. You don't need to idealize any government at all, nowhere, anywhere. Yuri, please. Thank you. The longer I held my hand up, the shorter my question is. Thank you very much for this algorithm. I'll work on it. It seems to me that nowadays in society there is a demand, if we're speaking about anatomy of a patriotism, not so much on patriotism. It's once people were allowed to write complaints to websites and write denunciations on somebody, the Roskomnadzor cannot even respond. If nowadays they're allowed to denounce on your neighbors, all the security services will be paralyzed. I suppose this exists objectively, and it doesn't have to do at all with love for your country. I agree, surely it doesn't have to do with love for your country. I'll be also brief. As to denunciations, this is a typical case we see in mass psychology. That is what we know in Stalinist time. There's no problem about reproducing the matrix in today's society, in post-industrial society. These laws of psychology will work as effectively as they did in Stalin's time. We're nowhere different from the people who lived then. We're no better or no worse. We're the same people who said they did not know about Gulag and they supported Stalin's government. We're the same people who during Perestroika, millions of people began to read thick journals and support democracy. We're the same people who then supported Putin, ostensibly having got tired of democracy. We're the same people. Nothing much changes here for many decades. Poland wants to say something. No, quite the opposite. I have a question which may sound silly, but in point of fact it's a serious question. You were speaking about the practice when, say, cultural elite which has supported Putin. My question is, why is it that Alla Pugacheva is not for Putin? Well, I think it has to do with her personal ideas about the good and the bad. It's clear that her financial sort of status is such that she can afford to be more independent than people who are in charge of orchestras, theatres, of whatever it might be in culture. You see, the existence of some cultural units, organized cultural units, it very strongly depends on the government, very much like business. Say, the same nature of dependence, but do not exclude that Pugacheva has her own views. Well, why not? She's also human, you know. We, all of us, have our own views. For that matter, I visited Warsaw in May, took a taxi a couple of times, and I just speak a little bit Polish, and I broke into conversation. And once we traveled from Marszałkowska, Novotel, to the editorial, place where the editorial, we discussed the Crimea. After the Polish taxi said, what does Putin have to do with that? Well, the Crimea was there, not needed by anybody. Why didn't he took it? Why can't he take it? This is an opinion of a person who lives in an Eastern European country. Journalists like to make references to taxi cabs drivers. This shows off like as if you know life. Well, I tend to wrap up our discussion because we did what we were supposed to do. Well, certainly I'll tell you what, in conclusion. The fact that we have Andrey Kolesnikov with us today, if we're guided by what he's discussed and how he discussed it, we could take it as part of the global plot to subordinate all things that live to one single center. But I suggest that a very different evaluation on this. We're lucky that we had, as a visitor, a person who has an excellent sense of humor, a very knowledgeable person, who doesn't lose his mind in a situation which does not predispose us to humor, man with fine understanding of both Russian policy and all matters pertaining to that, and a great friend of school. I would like to thank Andrey Kolesnikov for this session. Thank you. About the global plot, a well-known Jewish joke when a Jew told to the FSB, he said, they say that the Jews have sold Russia. Can I get my share, please? So, okay. Well, you know, they told you right about the further agenda. It means that Martina invites everybody, or those who want, to have dinner somewhat sooner, 15 minutes before the round table, so that we listen what she